Well, I do believe what the primordial tradition would say, namely that there is a continuum between our thoughts and, what should we say, a psychic realm of reality. And our minds sort of swim and maneuver in that psychic or spirit dimension of reality in the way our bodies swim or maneuver in the natural physical world. So I think in that sense there is a commonality and continuity between our thoughts and, if you want to say, spirits as the objective reality of which our thoughts would be the subjective side. Why, yes, that could be said.
Well, you're putting it much more elegantly than I had. One of the terms you just mentioned, continuity, is interesting, because when we deal in the realm of infinity, as the primordial tradition does, there is this sense of creation, all of creation being a continuity from the most sublime to the most horrible, and that creation itself, or the realms of evolution, the middle world, is a world in which every possibility expresses itself one way or another.
There's a prodigiousness, almost a prodigality of being in terms of how all the recesses and crannies of possibility somehow seem to need to be filled.
The issue of the soul is an important
You
one.
sound like you're starting like Plato. Let's talk about the soul. Good.
The soul is something which, well, I think I saw a book recently, and it talked about how there is no more soul. We've done away with the soul in modern culture. It was kind of a quaint, archaic notion, but it's unnecessary now, and we're much better off without it.
Well, it makes me think the last time I saw His Holiness the Dalai Lama, it was at a conference in Bombay on science and religion, and there were a couple of Nobel science winners there. George Wall from Harvard was one, and the Dalai Lama gave the opening inaugural address, and he was commending science with the scientists as what they had done for humanity. But then he said, but then in addition to the physical, the material world, there is the invisible world. Now he said, that might be awkward for you scientists, but never mind, it's there anyway. And I like the kind of direct way in which he came on. And that applies to the soul. Certainly, the soul will not show up on any brain scan, and it won't show up on any diagnostic tool that the psychologists have. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It's just that there are different regions of reality, and certain instruments are splendid for picking up certain dimension. But, well, the radio and the television give a perfect example, because certain waves are not picked up on a given frequency finder. That doesn't mean that those waves aren't there. This room is filled with waves that simply are not visible at this moment.
You, in your book, you describe that the attempt to find the soul, to examine it, is something akin to trying to see one's own eyes by stepping backwards.
That's another way to look at it. Yeah, that's quite right, quite right.
And yet, just as how we earlier described the mind as swimming in this sea of spiritual activity, the soul yearns for something more, I gather, something more than, realms of heaven and hell, something closer to the divine.
To the divine and the infinite. I think that's true. I think that the soul is at one and the same time the final locus of our individuality. It is what makes you, Jeffrey Mishlove, unlike any other person who ever has or will be, and yet is constant with you throughout your career. That's one thing, but it also has a tropism, a kind of dynamism in it, in which it is forever reaching beyond anything you have ever attained thus far, and it will never stop that reaching until we're told it finally loses its individuality by merging with the infinite.
So there is a sense there that that all of my yearning, all of my desires, and not just mine, everybody's yearnings are ultimately the yearnings of the soul, and perhaps we seek to satisfy ourselves through career advancement or through the attainment of material wealth, but ultimately these things are only, I suppose, poor substitutes for what the soul really desires.
Very well put. That's what we think we want. But the fact that when we get it, no matter what it is, how wonderful, it still cannot satisfy us completely, is evidence that it's ultimately not what we really wanted. It is a symbol, you might say, symbol of what we really wanted.
I suppose this must be why many religious traditions talk about the need to let go of desire, that desires sort of interfere with the real spiritual path.
That's a very complex and tricky subject, desires. They can be evidence of greed and clinging and grasping, but Buddhism and Hinduism that really are the most severe in talking about desire. Nevertheless, both of them immediately acknowledge that there are some desires that are wonderful. The desire to help other people, the desire to grow and become more than one has achieved. All of those, so we have to winnow when we come to desires and separate those that are helpful and from those that hold us back.